Chance Dorland, and this is the In-Depth Podcast, an interview program from expressnews.com with in-depth reporting and other resources for stories affecting San Antonio and Bexar County. More than 2 years after they were arrested and charged with sexual assault as part of a hazing scandal at Vernia High School, 4 former students have been indicted on charges of engaging in organized criminal activity. I'm joined now by Express News education reporter Liz Tights to get more details on this developing story. And Liz, of course, it's great to have you back here on the In-Depth Podcast. So let's start with some background on the 4 individuals who were arrested in 2017 and then now this week have been indicted. But before that, maybe just a general discussion on hazing and why hazing seems to be in the news more now than it was in the past.
Well, thanks for having me. I think we are seeing more conversations about hazing because, in recent years, things have come to light where I think people are experiencing or coming out and being open about more severe types of hazing. I think, we typically think of it as something that's embarrassing or demeaning as some sort of initiation or a way to start something, on a new team. But we've obviously had several cases, not just including this one where that has escalated to, a crime. And I talked to one of the attorneys representing one of the victims in this case yesterday, and he said, call it what it is. This isn't hazing. This is sexual assault. And so I think that's kind of where this conversation is going is looking at this as the crime that it is and not just an initiation, right, if you will.
No, that's an excellent point to bring up, not to try to say any hazing is okay, but usually when I think of the term hazing, it does not come to mind the types of things that we're going to talk about on today's episode. Very, very serious crimes that you've already mentioned. So now let's start with some background on these 4 individuals who were arrested in 2017 and this week have now been indicted for crimes that prosecutors say took place having to do with Vernia High School.
So back in 2017, this investigation started when victims went to police and reported that they had been assaulted by their teammates. And at that time, 13 people were arrested. 6 of them were adults at the time, 17 or 18 years old, and 7 of them were minors at the time. And they were all at that time charged with either sexual assault or sexual assault of a child. And then now we're a little more than 2 years out, and 4 of those same students who were arrested have been indicted by a grand jury in Wilson County, and they have all now been charged with engaging in organized criminal activity. And so what we know about that from reading the indictments is that they conspired to commit this offense. And so through the investigation, what we can infer from these indictments is that they have found that this was organized. This was something that these groups of students discussed and decided to engage in this action, and then that they did perform this action, so that they did carry out these agreements. And so what we knew at the time was police said there were probably at least 10 victims and probably more likely to come out. These indictments list a total of 9 incidents with 6 victims, but it is likely, there were others arrested that are not included in these indictments.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, taken actually directly from your write-up that's now available online at expressnews.com. You've written that local officials, as you just mentioned, said there were at least 10 victims, and this alleged hazing may have started in the 2014-2015 school year and continued until 2017. So can you tell me more about the alleged crimes and also their legal repercussions? Because these crimes, as you've already mentioned, they're pretty heinous, these allegations, and they've also led to some pending lawsuits, I believe.
Yes. So what we know about the crimes is that they all involve members of the team or older students on the team holding down or pinning down students and sodomizing them with different items. And so some of that, which is laid out in pretty graphic detail in both the indictments and in some civil lawsuits that are pending, have included a flashlight, a cardboard rod, the threaded end of a carbon dioxide tank, and There are two pending civil suits, which were filed by victims, and they've been consolidated into one case. And so that's still ongoing. But what we know from what they have filed in that case is that one student says he was assaulted more than 30 times. He couldn't even remember all of the times he'd been assaulted because it had happened so often. And another said that it was all part of an initiation when they were promoted from the JV football team up to the varsity football team. And officials said back in 2017 that this included the football team, the basketball team, and the baseball team at Vernia High School.
And so talking about teams, sports, obviously when you think of hazing, it often comes down to sporting groups and then sometimes colleges as well. Those are the ones that pop into my mind when I hear the word. Something really interesting, Liz, that I saw in your write-up that once again is available at expressnews.com. When one of these alleged attacks took place, apparently the victim says he was shouting at the time very loudly. And then when he came out, a coach was there. And apparently the allegation is that the coach would have heard that and the coach didn't do anything about it and then didn't do anything when the student came out. And I guess visibly would have looked like maybe he had been attacked. It seems like this was pretty rampant in the school. Is that what you've gotten research in this story?
Yeah, so we know it was widespread. We know that from talking to attorneys, we know that there are more victims who, probably have not or who are continuing to come out and discuss this. And the civil suits do allege that the school district was aware of it, that the coaches, that the administrators knew about this, and that they didn't intervene and that they let it happen. And so that's why they are suing the school district in this case while the criminal cases are ongoing prosecuting the students. And the school district has responded. They put out a statement earlier this week, essentially saying that they cannot comment on the exact indictments, but that they have been made aware of them. And they have also said that they are working to improve the safety and quality education of our students, and that they've provided counseling and programming support. But what it does come down to in this case is you do have victims who are alleging that there was kind of a widespread, pervasive culture of hazing and rape culture going on at this high school.
And then speaking more about the school staff itself, Vernia's superintendent, Jose Moreno, resigned in November of 2017 in the wake of the scandal. What can you tell me about that and the new person who's in charge of the school district now?
So Moreno did resign. He is now the superintendent in a school district in South Texas near Corpus Christi. He was replaced by Trent Levette in Vernia in 2018. And he has been now on the job for, I guess, a little over a year now.
And then, Liz, I believe this is not part of your story that's available at expressnews.com, but as is often the case, the reporter, he or she, will do a lot of work and not everything makes print, if you will. I believe you spoke to a lawyer of one of the students involved, one of the alleged victims involved in this case, and I'm sure that must have been interesting to hear that perspective.
Yeah, and what he told me is that in this case, it would not surprise him if the young men who perpetrated the crime had also been victims themselves, that it was, a legacy in some way because it had just become so much part of the culture. And so he really called this a double tragedy. It's a crime, obviously, for the victims, but in a situation like this, the perpetrators may have suffered from it themselves as well. And he talked about how difficult it's been for victims to be willing to come forward. Because there's a lot of shame and trauma of having to relive this and tell this story. And also the shame of what happened, which was, being attacked in locker rooms or allegedly being attacked in locker rooms and before team dinners and things like that. But he said, a lot of them are coming forward because they want to make sure that what happened doesn't happen to anyone else. It doesn't happen to their younger brothers or their younger friends who are in the community still. And so he's hoping that, the civil lawsuit, in addition to the criminal case, shines some light on that and opens that up to scrutiny and to improve.
And then speaking of the criminal case, I believe local officials have handed over at least some, if not all of the cases to higher authorities. Why was that decision made?
So that was made back in 2017. The Texas Rangers are handling the investigation, and the Texas Attorney General's office is handling the prosecution. And that was done because local officials said they wanted to ensure that there was no impartiality or neutrality issues. It's a small town. There's about 1,400 people in Vernia, and some of the prosecutors or some of the investigators very likely have children in the school district who go to school alongside the victims or the alleged perpetrators. And so that's why it was handed over and is kind of being handled at the state level separately from local prosecution.
And then, Liz, obviously, there's a lot more to the story yet to be told. You mentioned the criminal cases that are pending, the civil cases that are pending. I would just now like to give you time for final thoughts. Do you have any idea where this might be going in the short term? And then will you specifically be looking into this story into the future to find out where it goes?
Definitely, this is something that we're going to be following, absolutely. As far as what happens next in the short term, we'll see where these criminal cases go after an indictment. That will get the criminal case started on that side. I think we do still have a lot of questions. There were 13 people arrested, and we have 4 that have been indicted, and so there are obviously questions about the remainder of those, as well as whether they'll be facing any other charges. And I think we still have questions about the scope of this and how many people were affected and what has been done in the school district to change the culture and change the mindset and attitude. And so I think that's where we're going to be looking going forward.
And thank you to San Antonio Express News education reporter Liz Tights for joining me for today's episode of the In-Depth Podcast, an interview program from expressnews.com. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.